Good evening. My name is Joe Sam Robinson. It's my pleasure to have with us once again the famous, inimitable Dr. Buck Melton. Welcome, Buck.
Thank you. Always glad to be here.
You often start our conversation with saying something particularly erudite. Does you want to say anything for our audience tonight?
Sure. To quote the late Mercurian wit Bob Steed, the feathers are easy. It's the tar that's hard to get off.
Okay, well, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. Well, we talk about a lot of things, and one of the things going on is the terrible tragedy in the Middle East, the horrible things that are happening there, and then the spillover to our country. So we have this, we're enmeshed in that struggle. I would say the U.S. certainly, the government is certainly supporting Israel. It's trying to be an honest broker. Maybe that overstates what they're up to, but they certainly reasonably want to make things as less confrontational as possible. And in this country, we have all kinds of terrible things happening. The tensions are high, particularly with Jewish citizens and Islamic citizens. And the history of that, of anti-Semitism goes back a long way in our country and for a long time. Do you have any thoughts about that? Just to explore that and what the legal ramifications of that type of prejudice would be, or have any thoughts about that?
Well, yes, I mean, anti-Semitism, and I recently read a book on it, and I cannot even remember the author's name, but he argues even the phrase anti-Semitism doesn't make sense.
Of course
the
not.
opposite would be Semitism, but it's anti-Jewishness, and that's not just religion; it's a race.
It is everyone.
Yes.
Anti-Semitic person would be against Arabs.
Yes,
it would be against anyone that spoke a Semitic language.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
thousands, there'd be 500 or 800 million people in that category.
So it's one of these things that it's just assumed a different meaning from what the etymology might suggest. But it goes back, it's just a staple in Western civilization. And Herman Wouk, who is of course one of the greatest authors that America has ever produced, he wrote, among other things, he wrote The Caine Mutiny, which is, I think, the greatest maritime novel ever written by an American. He wrote The Winds of War and War in Remembrance, which is the American War and Peace. It really is. There's no other way to describe it. And he once pointed out that the Jewish people punch so far above their weight in terms of numbers in every major field of human endeavor, the arts, the sciences, finance, you
Yes.
name it. You have to wonder, why have everyone in the West dumped on them so horrifically for well upwards of 2,000 years?
Well, yes. It's a really complicated story, isn't it? About, if you want to call it Western civilization, the Roman Empire, the Temple in Jerusalem, the Romans conquering that area, the Jewish people become a wandering race, if you could say that, and going everywhere, always on their living, I guess you could say, by their wits, and no particular friends anywhere, but they make their way from different parts of the world. And a lot of their issues or difficulties, you could say, were referable to their relationship with Christianity. Obviously, Christianity arose out of the Jewish world. Certainly Christ was Jewish, if we can say that, and it's a little bit puzzling how tough this has been for eons.
It is, and I will say that anti-Semitism, if we're going to use that word, it predates Christianity, and its expression postdates Christianity as well. You talk about the Jewish diaspora, but for Pete's sake, look at Exodus, look at the Jews in Egypt, for that matter. You've even got it at that point. Yes, one framework of looking at it is that once you get to Christianity, that it's sort of a threefold thing. First of all, the persecution is on religious grounds, that the Jews are Christ killers, that they are the ones who have done this horrible thing, and they're outcasts. And for that reason, you have so many laws put in place. Jews, for instance, cannot own land. They can't tap into that major resource, which of course ultimately drives them into the professions. And they get the last laugh there because they become the great bankers, the great financiers, the great doctors, the great lawyers and scholars. Then you have the Enlightenment, and they are still sort of marginalized during the Enlightenment because they keep to themselves, they don't buy into the mainstream. And then finally, when you get to the mid-1800s and Darwinism begins, it doesn't have anything to do with them being members of the community or being the wrong religion. It becomes purely a matter of race. And of course, you see the ultimate expression of that with the Nazis. And of course, they saw anyone not Nordic, not Aryan as inferior. The Slavs were inferior, Africans were inferior, but of course the Jews headed the list there. So it's just been one nightmare after another.
It's a very vexing subject and difficult to get into easily. I think some of what goes on, the extraordinary difficulty the Jewish people face, is I wonder if that's related to being urban men and women par excellence. I mean, they live for reasons that, as you mentioned, about their inability to own land or to participate, and I guess you could say the Western feudal system, and they were in urban areas that actually, as human progress occurred, they became centers of power and influence, and so they were well positioned to have that extra I guess, power, if you want to use that word, and that was very inflammatory toward the people in rural areas. At least that's some of what was up, and additionally, wanting a scapegoat has always been a bad human quality, and one that can be exploited. And so actually the Jewish people had all this travail, all these terrible things happened. And then many people came to the United States. And I think in the 19th century, things were seemingly getting more liberalized. At least it would be unusual to have any terrible events happen, but they did. In Atlanta, was it 1910 with Frank?
Leo Frank.
The lynching there. So bad things.
And I think it's actually the most infamous lynching in Georgia history and arguably in American history was not of someone black, but of someone Jewish, Leo Frank. I mean, there were other horrible cases, the Scottsboro Boys, Emmett Till, but Leo Frank is right up there, and that tells you something very unpleasant about the United States in general and the South in particular.
Yes, and so it's very difficult to meld together people of different, I guess you could say, backgrounds, belief systems, just all interests, all kinds of things that mean that people are different and have some sense of apartness, and that causes can cause terrible events. Well, to me, I think the lesson of World War II certainly was profound in the United States, and I think there are sundry novels, books, viewpoints that the terrible things the Nazis did in many ways had an influence on anyone that would would be anti-Semitic in the U.S., seeing where that path led. And I think pretty much there are major efforts to diminish diminish that.
For at least a couple of generations.
Well, I think so. And the puzzling thing to everyone now, I think, is the overt anti-Semitism, which seems to have sprung up as a result of the conflict in the Middle East.
Yeah. Can we turn the clock back a little bit? Because I think one of the places we need to stop at is the late 1800s, really the mid to late 1800s, when for the first time you get truly major immigration into the United States from places in Europe that you hadn't seen them before. And I'm looking at Central Europe, Southern Europe, Eastern Europe. So it's not just a Jewish immigration, but you can even throw the Irish in there because they're Celts, not Anglo-Saxons, but then
and Catholics, not Protestants.
That's another big one. So the upheavals going on in Central Europe, the Irish potato famine in the 40s, the revolutions of 1848, the pogroms in the Pale in the late 1800s.
Well, why don't we mention the Pale, which was a restrictive area. So the Jewish people had many issues, and one of them was they could only live in one part of the Russian Empire, called the Pale. You just can't easily go anywhere else.
Right, exactly. And this was a center of the pogroms, and so you get all of these different groups, ethnic groups, getting out and coming to the United States. And I don't think that the Americans already here really distinguished. There was enough hatred to go around for everyone, the Poles or the Slavs or the Jews or you name it. And you saw this discrimination, and it wasn't just ethnic, it was also religious, as you point out, the tremendous anti-Catholicism. It was political as well, because you get these radical new political philosophies coming in from Central and Eastern Europe. And a lot of these are brought by Jewish persons as well as non-Jewish persons. But one name that comes to mind immediately is Emma Goldman, for instance. And so these are radical ideas, radical collectivist, Marxist ideas that really flew in the face of the burgeoning American capitalism of the time. So yeah, the Klan, the new Klan, which was founded in Stone Mountain around 1915. The thing that I always point out, it's not just anti-black, it's anti-anything that isn't WASP. And interesting, the phrase WASP has kind of died out in this generation. I'm sure you know wealthy Anglo-Saxon Protestant.
Well, I thought it was redundant. It was just white. In other words, it didn't have the wealth. Is the wealth part? The W was wealth. I thought it was just redundant.
No, wealth meant, W meant wealth.
Oh, not white.
Hard-working, successful Anglo-Saxon, not.
Well, now I've learned something. I always thought it was incorrect or redundant.
Yes. So yes, I mean, the thing to remember is the Nazi Party was the German version of the Klan. So yes, Jews and Catholics, Celts, Slavs are all included in that. And you're right, it's World War II, I think, that furnished the wake-up call, that made people realize this is where that road ultimately leads. So coming out of World War II, you saw several things. You saw the civil rights movement take place. And because African Americans who had gone abroad and fought for their country and then came home and were made to sit in the back of the bus said, no, this is not what we fought for. And at the same time, you saw large numbers of whites being softened in their racial stances and being more open to change. Not all of them by any sense. So both with regard to blacks, with regard to Jews, one of the first really big post-World War II civil rights cases, Shelley versus Kramer of 1948, was not a black civil rights case. It was a Jewish civil rights case saying that and I think this was a northern case, a New York case, but it made it to the U.S. Supreme Court. And it said, you can no longer put a restrictive covenant on your property that prevents subsequent owners from selling to Jews. well, you can put them on there, but the courts are not going to enforce them. So I think it's interesting that the first really big civil rights case is not a black civil rights case, it's a Jewish civil rights case.
Well, I mean, just looking at I guess you could say this, the country sort of is making its way through a dark and stormy night, we could say that, with all kinds of missteps. And we have this flare-up of anti-Semitism, and also the tension titers that are present in general in the country. The idea that everyone is going to melt. It's interesting, the idea of melting pot. All right, we're all going to merge in the melting pot, and we'll sort of be the same people, if we wish to say that. And then that idea is sort of fallen by the wayside in many ways, and the idea is differences. We're going to have just great differences, and that'll be great. We'll all be different, and we can have different restaurants, and we have a lot of stimulation, getting all these different opinions, different songs, different cultures. That'll be really an enriching experience. And actually, one of the things which I'm sort of trying to sail the ship into is the American experience. One would have hoped that things would have been rolling along in a peaceful journey to the sunlit uplands, and we could all live together in tranquility and peace. But we have so many different groups of people here, and if they collide with one another in another place, the tensions spill over here. And I think a lot of it appears to me that the anti-Semitism, which I have to say, I haven't seen any particular ever really any evidence of it in Macon, Georgia, that I'm aware of. Maybe it's out there.
Well, a few months ago, you remember the very unfortunate occurrence.
Oh yeah, the
of
guy
Temple
came,
Beth Israel, but that was an outside.
But people
thing.
were outraged
So,
about it.
yeah.
So there was not any. It certainly didn't start any fire. People were au contraire.
Yeah,
people
exactly,
thought this
exactly.
is bad, bad, bad. Well, I guess what I want to is probe a little bit is that right now there are large numbers of Islamic people in the country and many Palestinian people here. And obviously there's sort of this horrible event is taking place, and that particular group of people, along with a lot of people that see the Jewish people have been tormented by, I guess you could say, WASP, if you wanted to say that, or Christians or whatever. And now the idea is, well, you're really a colonialist. Israel is a colonialist state. You're part of the Nazis, I guess, whatever it is, the way the Western Europeans have dominated the world, and you're part of them, even though you've had these terrible experiences. And so many people, particularly on the campuses, from all kinds of post-colonial places, imagine that this controversy taking place in the Middle East is really a recapitulation of South Africa. The same, the apartheid issue, and I think actually famously Jimmy Carter called Israel a apartheid state, and there are arguments about that. It's pretty, if you parse that out, it gets pretty complicated as to the whole way things work with people, and obviously the Jewish people have had this 2,000 years of torment and powerlessness, and then they are in this situation where, with great difficulties, they have their own country, their own state, which it presumably will defend them the way that they would not have been defended, or say in the Dreyfus affair in France, just to throw that out. So they always seem to be getting these bad events. And okay, that is what's up in that area. And then the Islamic people have their claim to the land too, and and each side sees the other as mortal enemies, seemingly. And the question is, firstly, what's a more intelligent way to handle this in the U.S. About these competing constituencies that are disturbing whatever you could say, the progress of the post-World War II progress in the country. And it's not a good situation, is it? And big competing rallies, and I think particularly Jewish people are aware of the Holocaust or what happens when things get out of control. And the Islamic people are seeing what's happening on television, and these tension titers are just terrible. And what does a person of goodwill do? What should one do about these things?
Yeah, well, let's back up a little bit. I want to expand on some of the things you've said. That your generation is the generation.
I notice you're not in my generation, Buck. Can you say that?
Well, technically, we are both boomers, but I'm a very late boomer, and I've always behaved and acted more like a Gen X. So I'm putting you a little bit ahead of me.
Okay. I'll take that as a compliment. I mean, I hope you.
Well, you are
genuflect to the wisdom of past generations. So I hope that's.
You may take it any way you wish, but I am going to put you in a slightly different generation than I am, because it is the generation of that came of age in the 50s and early 60s. That you get.
I think that's fair. I made a joke about it. We talked about the French view of history, their classes.
Yes.
So the class of 1914, when the class was
Yes.
whenever you became eligible for the French draft.
Yes.
Historiographers do that. And so I guess the year that you became eligible for the draft in the United States, that's what you've been imprinted.
Yeah, I mean, you have clear memories of Vietnam and could have been involved in that.
I
and
certainly
I don't.
could have.
I have just very vague memories of it. So I think that's a big watershed. So I'm going to stick with my guns here.
I'll throw one memory out, trying to study in Harvard Yard, and then people linking arms, a great running around Harvard Yard saying, ho Chi Minh.
Yeah.
They were just running around out there, and it disturbing my efforts to study, getting into that
How dare
biochemistry.
they?
Yes,
How dare
yes,
they
yes,
say?
yes.
But yeah, your generation, it was the origin of the new left, that you came of age being able to see on the one-eyed monster, the television,
Yes.
the injustices that did exist in America, despite the fact that we had tried to fight against injustice in World War II. It was the first generation where you saw, I think, a sizable number of Americans who really saw America as fundamentally evil and a force for evil in the world. And not all of them by any means.
Which has continued, and it's really
Exactly.
blossomed, hasn't
Yes.
it? Which is extremely, a very destructive turn of, in my opinion, terrible.
So if Israel, I think we do need to understand that America has done evil things and is engaged in it.
As everyone has.
Yes.
We hope less than others, but we have our share.
But we have to learn from it. We don't ignore it, and the people who ignore it are the dangerous ones.
It's inherited sin, aka we have a rhinoencephalon in our brain. So it's this. Yes, we're all sinful. And from my point of view, the reason we are sinful is the way our brain is constructed.
Yes, I concur, and I've really greatly incorporated that into my teaching, by the way.
Oh, good.
But at any rate, so yes, take this fundamental hatred of America that some aspects of the American population now have, and then you see Israel as America's proxy state or colony, if you will, and then the fact that the Israelis were, in fact, the Hebrew people were, in fact, tremendously, horribly persecuted and exterminated by Western civilization in the 1940s. They are very touchy about it. They have responded
reasonably so.
But they have responded harshly, especially under Netanyahu. I mean, to at least a slight degree, they have edged towards becoming what they beheld, and their rationale for it, and it's not one that you can totally discount, is we have to do this in order to survive, because there are Arab groups out there who have vocally said they wish to exterminate us.
It's an old idea, isn't it? It's and you could say a Germanic one or maybe a Nazi one. Power makes right, and so in this complicated dilemma, how can we peacefully chat about this or make some and seemingly the answer is no. The only way to protect your kith and kin is to exercise power. And of course, when that happens, it's just an endless.
And it opens you to criticism too.
Well, so, it's endless. Yeah. And so the other side is going to respond. And actually, maybe I've said this. I'm not sure what the correct policy is, but I don't think it's going to be successful. Mm-hmm. I just don't think that would happen. It's just too much cannon fire going on. And in a way, the Hamas people, it's played into their hands.
Yes.
I mean, pretty knowledgeable people have chatted about some of which is another thing to discuss, the strategy they had about their Palestinian cause, what to do about it, and this presumably was the outcome they wanted. They wanted this Israeli response to blowing people up on world television, yes, and thousands of people around the world protesting, and the ultimate outcome, it may be more complicated than the mere application of power to solve these dilemmas.
Yes. Well, it's, back in the days when we were isolationist, I mean, I think that when we moved away from isolationism, it was a terrible mistake. One of the greatest of American diplomatic historians, Samuel Flagg Bemis, whose work is still well worth reading, wrote of the time that we really openly came out of our shell for the first time, the Spanish-American War. He refers to it as the aberration of 1898. But the problem is, we do live in a global society now with global transportation, global communication. There's probably a bigger Jewish population in New York than there is in Israel right now. So how can you be?
Well, not quite, but
being a bit facetious,
it's a big number.
But how can you be isolationist when you have these ethnic and religious links to these hot spots on planet Earth? Is there any way to keep that, to put it in viral terms, from spilling over into the United States population when you've got these global connections? And once it's spilled over, how do you deal with it?
Well, that's exactly the issue that I would like to hope that our policymakers, our politicians of repute are addressing. And so we have the 8 billion people on the planet, all with sharp elbows, all with these Neolithic brains that are prone to hate and war and rapine and all kinds of terrible issues. And they instinctively go to the in-group and the out-group, and we have wars, and rumors of wars, to quote the Bible. What are we going to do about that? And actually, firstly, I think, is understand human nature better than they do. And it is a world problem. And the fact that only, I would say, of the 8 billion people, maybe a billion of them live in, Western conditions, if you wish to say that. And most people that on the planet are in a terrible set of, their life is quite vexing, difficult, dangerous. And how are we going to make that work? The climate is a big deal. The plague is a big deal. War is a big deal. Nuclear weapons are a big deal.
Yeah, the answer to a lot of this is stop having children. So.
Well, the biological urge, as powerful as it is, I don't think we can stop that, but it would be good to look into the birth rate. I think that would be fair.
Yes. What is your background? I am mostly, despite my English name, I'm mostly German with a little English and some Scots thrown in, but. So
that is an excellent question.
Yeah.
I mean, as far as I know, my ancestors arrived from England as indentured servants in the 1620s. They came through Jamestown. They just spent 10 generations as farmers, and presumably all. I think you have to say, what is your background?
Yeah. If
you go back 10 generations, you're going to have that's 2 to the 10th. You're going to have 512, you have 1,024 ancestors. You have 1,000 everywhere, 1,000. If you go back 400 years, you'll be at 1,000,000, 600 years, 1 billion. So you're actually pretty much related to everybody. I'll throw that out.
Well, I'd also throw in
who knows? I mean,
that conservatively speaking, you've probably got a 10% chance in every generation that the person you thought was the male parent was not the male parent, which makes it even more difficult.
Well, yeah, I think the point is well taken,
Yes.
is that many people imagine that one occasionally sees this, well, I'm descended from whatever, the Duke of Edinburgh or
Yes.
someone like that. And actually the smallest cat's whisker of DNA
Yes.
may come from there.
Yes.
And a million other bits of DNA are more likely from, I don't know, criminals and saboteurs and all kinds of dwellers in penitentiary, whatever. And
Well,
so we're
and-
all a mixture, particularly in the U.S.
But with my 10% argument is that one little bit from the Duke of Edinburgh is actually from his valet. But I guess what I'm trying to say is during World War I, you and I would not be holding briefs for England versus Germany and protesting against each other to a huge degree. Certainly not to the degree that you see going on today because of what's going on in Gaza. So how do you diffuse that? I don't know.
Well, I think we've blundered into a discussion on the human condition, which is salutary to think about.
Yes.
And on that note, Buck, I'd like to thank you for being here once again
Thank
with
you.
your erudite comments. Thank you.
Thank you, sir.
This program is brought to you by the Georgia Neurosurgical Institute. For over 50 years, rendering neurosurgical care to patients of all social conditions, treating complicated problems involving the brain, spine, spinal cord, and peripheral nerves, endeavoring to encourage quality care, medical research, innovation, and education on a local, national, and international basis.